Putin's threats of escalating to tactical nuclear weapons and all of these sort of things, they've never led to any substance. And the idea that President Putin has in his arsenal the ability to really change the calculus of the war seems fallacious.
What difference do you think is going to make on the ground in Kursk? And to begin with, we understand these ATACMS are only going to be allowed to be used in the Kursk Oblast. We understand Russia have regained about a third of the territory that Ukraine captured over the summer in recent months. What difference do you think this is actually going to make on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to make a difference. Undoubtedly, these are extremely capable missiles that can now be used to their full potential, out to almost 200 miles. Very, very capable, and that is, of course, a good thing. But what we mustn't do, and you and I have discussed this, but before, as have many others, is to think that the provision of a single new capability to Ukraine's arsenal is decisive. You know, we've had these conversations, haven't we, when main battle tanks were put into the fight, when F-16s came into the game. And quite understandably, it always generates a bit of conversation. Is this going to be the game changer? None of these things are a game changer in and of themselves. As you know, warfare is about the orchestration of all of these assets. And now they've got another instrument to play with to bring to bear. That is helpful. But in and of itself, it can't change the calculus of the battle. And as you say, in the first instance, it appears that they will be used in around Kursk to allow the Ukrainians to defend their foothold there.
Is this, in your view, Rupert, one last gesture by the Biden administration in support of Ukraine? Or could we still see, between now and Donald Trump's inauguration at the end of January, could we see, for example, the Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles also being approved for use and potentially outside of Kursk?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to know, isn't it, what the politics in Washington are that have brought about this decision now. I confess, I always found it pretty extraordinary, the political decision making in the first place that led to the missiles not being provided. So who knows, what the administration is thinking about as to, is it trying to secure its legacy? What is it that it's trying to do? Hard to know. It would seem to me that the Washington hasn't got much more to offer this side of Trump's inauguration. As you say, the next bit of the calculus is, will Britain and France be allowed to offer up their missiles, which, as you know, that are under, if you like, Washington restriction because they contain some some American technology. Both London and Paris have made clear for some time that they would like to provide those missiles, but have been constrained from doing so. One assumes, and there's media speculation to suggest that there'll be conversations going on at the G20 to get the release of those British and French missiles.
And I appreciate you are probably as confused by this as I am, Rupert, but can you explain to me, if possible, what the difference is between approving ATACMS and not approving Storm Shadow and Scalp? Why would you approve the use of one but not the others?
I mean, really, really hard to see why you would. I mean, it would seem, peculiar in the extreme. I don't see any difference. It just seems to me that and of course there may be things going on that we're not seeing, but as far as one can tell, it is merely that authorization process has not yet happened. I cannot see why Washington would allow their own missiles to be used now, but deny Britain and France from providing similar authorization.
I mean, I suppose, just to play devil's advocate, the arguments in favour of this more piecemeal approach to, weapon supplies to Ukraine, and you mentioned, there was the debate about main battle tanks, then it was the F-16s, now we've got these long-range missiles. I suppose if you gave Ukraine access to all of them in one go at the start, even though that would clearly help them on the battlefield, that maybe would be a significant escalatory action that could provoke a drastic response from Moscow. And the argument might be that the piecemeal approach is wiser in the long term.
Yeah, and of course that is an argument. It's an argument I would wholly push back on, because of the point I made earlier, that these are restrictions that should not have been there in the first place, because Ukraine has absolute right under the law of armed conflict to use the weapons at its disposal for self-defense. And self-defense includes striking legitimate targets, in this case, inside of Russia. The law is absolutely clear about that. And by being so rather mealy-mouthed, as frankly we have been for the last 2 years in the provision of our equipment, we just play into Moscow's hands, not only on the battlefield, but going back to our earlier conversation, because it just gives Moscow another ability to come out with this false narrative. If you just do it all at once, Putin gets to say his ridiculous lies, and then we move on to the next thing. And oh, by the way, all the way through, it has been clear that Putin's threats of escalating to tactical nuclear weapons and all of these sort of things, they've never led to any substance. And the idea that President Putin has in his arsenal the ability to really change the calculus of the war seems fallacious. Now, that's not to say they can't make tactical gains on the battlefield. They can, and they are, but they're very small gains. These aren't substantial breakthroughs. So I think we should continue to assess Putin's threats carefully, of course, and I'm absolutely certain the intelligence communities are doing that really, really rigorously. But then assess and judge his words against his previous actions.
Let's come on to the election of Donald Trump. Of course, he'll be inaugurated for his second term as US president in January. Some of the analysts I've spoken to since his election victory a fortnight ago on Frontline have actually said that maybe we have been too pessimistic about what a Trump presidency means for Ukraine. And certainly some of the mood music from his conversations, his early conversations since his victory with President Zelensky has seemed more positive. Now, of course, Zelensky's a very good diplomat and he knows it's in his interest to try and build good relations with Trump. But how do you see the relationship between Kyiv and Washington playing out under a Trump presidency?
I mean, I think the first thing to say is we don't know. We should watch this space carefully. I think it's fair to say, but I would agree with those comments. I think President Trump, he likes to use really bold phrases. I'll end the war in a day. He's used previous comments in his last presidency, but he doesn't want to be a loser. He really cares about what people think about him. He's got this kind of slight blind spot that in many ways most politicians do not. And I suspect he was thinking carefully about President Biden's legacy with regards to Afghanistan and the ignominious withdrawal of American and indeed NATO forces at President Biden's bidding. You throw away your gains if you do that. If President Trump takes a similar approach in Ukraine, he will have that on his conscience. He'll have it on his legacy. And I don't think he'll want to do that. He's a deal maker. He's a pragmatist. He'll be looking for some way through this. But I think it's most unlikely that that's going to involve just throwing in the towel, handing the gold to Putin. And I'm sure that Trump will wish to negotiate in some way or form with Putin in a way that others have not. But I don't think that automatically leads to capitulation for Ukraine. I think it's been much more nuanced than that. I certainly hope it will be.
And I think what's pretty clear is he wants some kind of peace deal at some point. He wants some kind of negotiated settlement. But actually, I would say that the mood music from Ukraine is more positive towards that. If there was some kind of freezing of the front lines, Kyiv might be more open to that. At the moment, the Kremlin are very, very much insistent that they want the complete capitulation of Ukraine, which simply isn't going to happen. And so if Trump feels like Moscow is being obstructive in some way, he may look more sympathetically on Ukraine. And I think he's made the comments in the past that he's prepared to arm Ukraine to the teeth if Moscow don't come around the negotiating table.
I think that's absolutely right. People who think they can genuinely negotiate with President Putin haven't studied him enough, nor have they studied actually the history of Russia and how Russia does its business. So the idea of a real negotiation in good faith with President Putin seems unlikely. As you say, the facts on the ground are probably changing views a little bit in Kyiv about, outright victory, regaining all of their pre-2014 lands. And so some kind of frozen conflict seems possible, undesirable, but every outcome, frankly, or every credible outcome is, frankly, undesirable. I don't buy the talk of some kind of, UN policed demilitarized zone. I simply don't know how that would come about. The idea that any NATO forces could be part of that UN force. I mean, I don't see how that's a thing. But a frozen conflict, and of course there was a frozen conflict in Ukraine prior to the latest invasion 1,000 days ago. And so returning to some kind of frozen conflict, deeply unpalatable though it is for the Ukrainians, may seem more appealing than it did a year, 2 years ago. And this is where their incursion into Kursk, it seems to me, has always been a smart move. Because, there was lots of talk at the time, which I'm afraid I just didn't buy at all, that Kursk was all about taking pressure off of the front line and drawing Russian reserves. For me, that was completely missing the big play. The big play was a strategic one, which was to take some sovereign Russian soil, which is humiliating for President Putin, and finally gives President Zelensky a genuine bargaining chip. It almost doesn't matter how big that salient is. As long as they can hold some sovereign Russian territory, then they have a very, very potent bargaining chip. Because, as I say, you can't negotiate with President Putin in good faith. But if you've got something he needs back, and make no mistake, he needs his Russian soil back, that is deeply humiliating to him, then it gives you in a position of greater strength when the music stops.
Thank you for watching today's episode of Frontline. For early access to our videos, member-only Q&As and live streams, then sign up for a membership via the link in the description. And for the latest news and breaking stories, listen to Times Radio and follow us at thetimes.com.